Setting up for a new month in my journal always feels like a fresh start, which is a really nice time to re-motivate myself, get back in line with my goals, and make sure that I've planned for the progress that I'm hoping to make in the month ahead. While I'm usually quite excited about this process, for the month coming, I'm more nervous than I am excited. And that's because I've fallen into a bit of a journaling slump. For that reason, before we get too into the weeds of doing the setup, let's first chat about why I'm setting it up the way I am. I'm not gonna lie, April in my journal has been kind of rough. The layouts that I have previously used and have worked quite well for me just aren't really working, and this kind of like slumpy, demotivated state has started to bleed out into other life areas, or maybe those life areas are bleeding into my journal. One of the two, but either way, I've just been finding that my journal hasn't really been exciting me. Excited for, not my journal. I haven't been inclined to get in and use it. I haven't filled out my start of month pages or whatnot. So let's have a flip through, talk about what isn't working, and figure out what I need to change. This monthly dashboard layout, the intention behind it is to get me cool, calm, and collected for the month ahead, knowing what's coming up, what am I excited for, all of that kind of stuff. And notably, you can see a chunk of this has not been filled in. I filled in the part related to my goals and projects and what I'm working on, so that I could check them off if any of them got finished. I also put in a space for my life admin RPG, or effectively the kind of like gamification I'm doing of my life. And I also filled in the part related to routines, because these routines are related to my goals and projects. So all of this kind of got filled in at once, and then all of this got neglected, which leads me to believe that this stuff is stuff I don't really need. While they have worked previously, and I do like the idea of it, in practice, if I'm not using it right now, there's not a lot of point putting in the time, effort, energy to set this kind of stuff up if I'm not going to utilize it. So that's going to be something that probably has to come out of the system. Flipping over though, then we have the monthly log, and the monthly log and Jess have always had an interesting relationship. It's one of those things that I'd put it in, like we have here, and then not really use it, but anytime I don't put it in, I'd feel weird and then just go straight back to it the next month. I think part of the reason behind why I have a weird relationship with it is this kind of information gets captured in other places. So this is really just duplication. Effectively duplication because I feel like I need to have the layout rather than actually needing the layout, if that makes sense. I feel compelled to put it in because it seems typical to put it in, but in terms of using this and its function, I've got other systems that are doing this for me. In particular, I have Notion to capture all of my work-related outputs and when those come out, and then I have my calendar on my Outlook for any time-based or appointment-style events. I don't really need to recapture that in here. So this is probably a layout that I don't really need either. Flipping over though, the next one we have is the work output space. And this is where I summarize all of the work outputs in terms of video content for the channel, things to do for the memberships, newsletters, and all of that kind of thing. This time around I also had Project Get Ahead because I was really aiming to get ahead on my content, especially because in April and May I have some things that'll be taking me away from work. So I wanted to get ahead as much as I could so it wasn't stressful when I had to leave. Notably, outside of the small amount I filled in here, and the small amount of dots I put in on this side, haven't really used this one either. That's not to say these things haven't gotten done, it's just that I'm not super inclined to come back and look at this. I'd rather have this information in my weeklies or daily logs or whatnot, because that's kind of where it gets actioned rather than flipping back to this to check in the progress of something. I spend a lot more time with my dailies usually than I do in these kind of start of month pages. This is also another one where the information is captured somewhere else. I have all of this stuff on Notion. I have a kind of Kanban board style on there, so I can take videos from planning to filming to editing to finished or whatnot. So just like the monthly log, it feels like a bit of duplication that isn't really necessary. Now obviously the way that I set up my journal is probably a little bit different to the way you set up yours. You're probably in a different line of work, you have different requirements for what you want your journal to do, but hopefully showing you my thought process going from looking at the current month to planning for the next one is helpful. I'm not necessarily looking to change every single thing in my setup, I just want to make sure that I'm powering down to the things that are working, because I have been finding I'm not really using my journal as much as I'd like to be. Another example of this is my projects and goals space. This is a layout that I would typically go in and outline what my different projects are and goals and such, and then break them down into actionable steps that I can keep track of. The problem here though this is a duplication again. I have a goal planner. That being this journal where I've already planned out my goals and projects for this quarter. So to take the information from here and then write it in here and then write it on my dailies and weeklies, that's a lot of repetition that I don't really need. I would much rather just take the actions for any given week out of this journal and put them onto my weekly layout. If you're wondering what this is my wedding dress, and I thought it kind of looked like a body bag, so I stuck a little picture of it in here because it says wedding planning with no steps attached because haven't been using this layout either. While I do like to have a summary of my goals and projects like we had on the dashboard layout here, I don't think I need to break them down into the action steps in this journal because I'm already doing that in another one. After this though, we're into the layouts that I typically would use fairly consistently, and you can see they do look a lot more filled in compared to some of the previous ones. This one here is like my weekly dashboard, so I have my meals section, or like our meal plan for the week, my priorities list, which I'm trying to make more goals and projects focused rather than letting other things infiltrate that list. And then also a space for routines. Notably, didn't check off a lot of the routines because this feeling of kind of like overwhelm, demotivation, slumpy kind of feelings has started to creep in, and filling out a little space like this is never really a priority when I'm feeling that way. We have our daily logs with some minimal decoration that matches the month, and that's also probably another thing that I haven't really been feeling this month, is that this decorative style isn't really working either. I think that it's either too simplified, which sounds a little silly. It's like, okay, we've got a sticker and a tape and that's it. And then we've got the blue second line highlights, which are very hard to see, but they are there. And so it kind of doesn't feel maybe like decorated enough, or at least not decorated in the right way to incentivize me to get into my journal, because I will get into my journal if I like the way it looks, and I don't really like the way this looks. Another issue is probably the fact that the printed headers are on a matte paper, so while you can't really see the outline of them as well on camera, you can see them in person, and it does bother me. Previously I would have printed these on a washi or a vellum paper, but the one I recently got smudges a lot, and smudging doesn't lead to very nice looking pages, or at least I don't think it does. For the second week of the month, you can see that I tried to do the routines again, parted back just a little bit, but still didn't really check in with it. We have the priorities, which we have a decent chunk checked off, so we can be pleased with that kind of progress. The meal plan was going fairly well, all good, but then I just kind of hit a stopping point. Like we've got, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday's there, Friday is gone, Saturday and Sunday I only stuck in because I really just felt like I needed to, but I also put a little note down here for myself to kind of explain why I wasn't using the monthly setup. As it says here, feeling quite uninspired by my journal at the moment and not sure how to proceed. I think I might be missing some of the creativity aspects while also wanting to make it more utilitarian. I also think I just don't much like the decoration I have for this month. To fill up some space on this layout, I stuck in some more pictures. I've been enjoying that part. I like doing the little pictures of daily life in amongst my daily logs. I think it's a little bit of fun. And then because I had recently had this sticker set from the washi tape shop arrive, I decided to sticker bomb this page rather than using it for any more daily logging. Doing this kind of got me thinking like, oh gosh, have I just been making my journal performative? Like, am I trying to make it look nice just for the internet or something like that? Which certainly can happen. We can definitely fall into the trap of doing that. And I think in some respects I have, but not necessarily in the way most people would think. In terms of the decoration we have here, I want it to be simple and easy, so it's, just stick stuff in and then get in and do my daily logging and such. But by simplifying the decoration in this way, I've actually made it so I don't really enjoy working in my journal. Following that kind of revelation and realizing that I'm just not using the layouts that I set up, I decided to change things up for the second half of April and went to something a lot more minimal. I don't know why it is, but anytime I think of minimal bullet journal or like original bullet journal, I always think black and yellow, probably in part because the book is in black and yellow. By the book, I mean The Bullet Journal Method by Ryder Carroll, but anyway. And while this has been working for me well so far, I'm only like 2 days into using it, so we'll see how it actually goes. I do know that I still want decoration in my layouts. So I've set up for the rest of the month. You can see these little kind of daily boxes along the top here. We then finish off my cycle on this Sunday, so that'll be the end of week 4, which means we're going to be starting May here. The thumbnail probably gave it away, but for May, I'm planning on going with a kind of like botanical scrapbook style, with one of the main supplies being brown paper bags. But to start with, I just wanted to cover the entire first spread of the layout with scrapbooking paper. This one was fairly neutral in design, so it makes for a very good background for the other elements I'm going to be sticking in, because as I'm going for that botanical scrapbook look, I'm looking at doing a lot of layering, bringing in a lot of different elements together, ones that weren't necessarily from the same like set of stickers or anything, because I've just been missing that kind of creativity. Notably, the start of this video was a little bit different to what we usually have in these monthly setups, but hopefully hearing my thought process behind how I'm setting up for this month and what I've decided to keep, what I've decided to scrap, was helpful for you in thinking about how you plan your own journal setups. I expect if it wasn't, you probably either skipped the intro or you're not here anymore, which means you're not hearing this. But if you are hearing this, please let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd be curious to know if that kind of thing is helpful for you to hear, or if you really just prefer seeing the setup and not hearing the kind of backstory about why the elements are in there. Any feedback you have would be helpful. To stick in the scrapbooking paper though, the first thing I did was fold the paper in half so that I could have a nice distinct crease that could go into the center of the spread. I find that pre-creasing the paper just helps me adhere it to the paper in a way that means it's not like restricting the opening of the notebook or have extra paper that's then kind of buckling or anything like that. And once it was folded, rather than putting the adhesive onto the scrapbooking paper, I put it onto the journal page instead. This meant that I could get it very closely aligned to the edges of the spread, because one of the things that I find happens with sticking in larger pieces of paper that kind of like fully cover a spread, if I don't have the adhesive really close to the edge of the page, anytime I go to use the layout, I think that there is an additional page there and I try to turn to it, then trying to like effectively rip up the paper I just stuck in. By having that adhesive as close to the edge as possible, it stops me from doing that. I find it easier to get that adhesive very close to the edge if I use a tape roll rather than a tape roller, and that's why I ended up using two different types of adhesive in this setup. My Tombow tape roller, which is more convenient for getting the adhesive onto things, and then the tape roll, which is more convenient for getting the tape really close to the edge of pieces. Of course, all of the things I've used are linked in the description box below, but once the background paper was in, then it was time to build up all of the layering. One of the first elements I stuck in was just crumpled up brown paper, which is literally like a brown paper bag that you can get at the supermarket. I love these because the paper is really thin, so it doesn't add a lot of bulk to your journal, but it gives me those craft paper elements that I enjoy the look of. Along with the brown paper bags, another element that I used repeatedly in the setup for decoration was just a simple green botanicals washi tape. This one came as part of the self-care box from Ordner last year, so it's no longer available, but it made for a nice little pop of color that was still in the more subdued color palette that I was going for. One of the things that I love having in my layouts though is contrast, and the way that I achieved that this time was using really dark headers. These ones offer their own contrast because we have white text on black backgrounds, but compared to the mostly lighter tones of the decorative elements, this made the headers stand out really nicely while also giving us some visual interest. While designing the layouts for this setup, I was very mindful about not only how do I make it look nice, but how do I also make it functional. The first spread that I've typically been using in my journal setups has been a monthly dashboard, but as shown in April, a lot of these sections were going unused, or I didn't really find them helpful enough to warrant filling them in. For that reason, I am still going to be doing the monthly dashboard, the purpose of which is to get me cool, calm and collected for the month ahead, but I'm paring it down to just the elements that I thought were going to be most useful. In particular, this is having a summary space for my work outputs, or the pieces of content that I'll be putting out as part of my videos, my memberships, that kind of thing, just as a summary list, not as any kind of like Kanban board or like tracking the progress of all of those, just simply stating what they are and checking them off when they're done. The other section is going to be a goals and projects list. This isn't to break down what I need to do for each of those goals and projects, because I already have that information summarized in my goal planner. This is just giving me a simplified list to look back on so I can see at a glance what my priorities are. Because I stuck that scrapbook paper over the entire of the page, this meant that I also needed to stick in sections that I could write on. I could have technically written on the scrapbook paper, but I thought it would be nicer to have some dedicated sections on separate pieces of notepad paper. The simple doc grid notepad is from Stationery Pal, whereas the one with the lines is from Archer and Olive, again from a previous release that sadly isn't available anymore. But if you wanted to do something similar, you can find images that look pretty much the same online and then just print them off on paper and stick them in. I thought that one of the nice parts about using these notepad pieces, rather than using the doc grid of the notebook, is that the space on these is a lot more limited to what I'm used to. That means that I need to be more intentional about which goals and projects I'm undertaking, and also I don't get tempted to write out too many things from my work outputs. Like, the number of work outputs will still be the same, but the information that I'm recording about them doesn't need to be as in-depth as I've had it previously. As said, I have other spaces for that. I don't really need to then go and add the same information into my journal, because that just gives me multiple places to check things off, which isn't necessarily the best use of my time. I also find that, in a strange way, it starts to build distrust in my systems. If you're recording the same information in multiple places, inevitably you're probably going to end up forgetting to record it in one of them at some point. And you can't necessarily be assured that it's going to be in your journal or on the other space that you're recording that. Given that I'm already recording my work outputs in Notion, I really want that to be the main kind of one-stop shop for everything I need to do content-wise, to the extent where I actually undertook a very large kind of overhaul project earlier this year to get all of my work outputs onto there, not just my video content. So also thinking about, what are we putting out for the channel members? What are we doing over in Epic Goals? What are we doing in the newsletter? By having all of that information in the one place, I can build more trust into that system, knowing that if there's something work-related, it can be found over there. This is a similar idea with the monthly log. Because I record all of my time-based activities like appointments and events and that kind of stuff on my Outlook calendar, but then I also started recording things on my monthly log, I don't necessarily know where to check for the most up-to-date information. But it's all good because I have a fix for that problem. In terms of timing though, from first to final touches on this layout, it took me about 30 minutes. That time doesn't include sticker anxiety time or fussing around with paper scraps and putting them in exactly the right place time, so let's just add another 10 minutes. It's certainly not a style that I'm particularly quick with, but I think having the final product actually get used is worth the time that I put into it. Also, if you thought that something was missing from this layout, don't worry, I did eventually go and add "It's gonna be May." It is a staple from my May setups, it had to be there. But I did do it after I finished recording everything else. Even just with this first spread setup, I'm already feeling so much more excited about the month ahead. Probably in part because this is a theme or a style that I've been meaning to try for a while, and also because the dashboard I know can be helpful if I just focus on the areas that are actually gonna be useful. Flipping over though, and the next layout we're gonna set up is another one that I know is gonna be helpful, and this is gonna be a space for a mind unwind or a brain dump. Normally this spread would be the monthly log, that one coming right after the monthly dashboard, because when I set up my layouts, I like to work from what I consider the widest area of use to the most narrow. This is why the dashboard comes first as a kind of overview of all of the different parts of the month, the goals, the projects, things that are coming up, all of that, and then I would go into the monthly log because it summarizes when everything is happening. This time around though, I'm not actually including a monthly log, because as said previously, I don't have a great relationship with my monthly log. Most of the time I set it up seemingly out of obligation. It's like, okay, well, you know, bullet journals have a monthly log, so I'll put one in. But if I'm not using it because I have another system that helps store all of that information, there's not a lot of point putting in a layout which is pretty much just there to make me feel bad about myself almost. Like, I kind of feel that by including a monthly log in my setup, I just end up kind of guilting myself into using it. Most of the time I populate stuff at the start of the month so I can see at a glance what things are happening, and then I usually don't touch it again until the mid-month point where I do a journal check-in to see how things are going. Given that I know this about my pattern of use, I'm just gonna let the monthly log go this month. That doesn't necessarily mean it won't come back at some point, but I would like to actively try not using it, and more intentionally commit to putting things on my Outlook calendar. If I can trust that my Outlook calendar has all of that information, I'll be more likely to use that space and use it more effectively. For the mind unwind space though, this is essentially what you can consider a brain dump or just a mental declutter, a way to get any thoughts out of your head and onto paper. These are really helpful for being able to sort through your thoughts and prioritize things and such. And because I haven't been using my journal as much recently, I've been finding that my mental clutter is at an all-time high. I wanted to use this as a space to get rid of all of those things I've been ruminating on before the month starts, maybe so that I can action them during the month, or otherwise they might just go in my future me problems list, or they might not even be tasks. They might just be things I've been thinking about. Because I wanted to be able to write down lots of things on this page, I just focused my decoration in the bottom left-hand corner and the top right-hand corner. Pretty much all of the other space though has been left open to write down anything and everything in my head so I can make sense of it on paper. I have been trying to get into a better routine of doing one of these once a week as part of my weekly reset process, but with not getting into my journal as much recently, I haven't been keeping up with it. I am hoping though that I can better routinize it in May. In terms of the time taken to set this one up, it only came in at about 11.5 minutes, and that's because I didn't really have to think very much about the placement of the elements. It wasn't like the dashboard where I had to make sure I had enough space for my work outputs and enough space for my goals and projects, and where were those going to go in relation to each other, and sticking in the scrapbook paper, which also took a chunk of time. What also made the decoration take less time here is that I used some collage-y stickers, or ones that already kind of look like they've got layers of paper stuck to each other, but they're individual sticker panels. A very convenient way to do the decoration and still make it fit the theme. Rather than leaving this layout to be used in May, as mentioned, I wanted to use it before May to get rid of everything in my head before the month starts. To help myself do the mind unwind process though, or the brain dump, I am using what we call a trigger list. Now, I know not everybody gels with that term. You can call it a prompt list or a spark list if you want to, but this is a list that I have in my long-term collections journal, which has the specific function of helping me do a more thorough brain dump. This one just has a bunch of different categories with little prompts that are related to my life that I can run my eyes over and use that to kind of jog my memory or trigger thoughts for my brain dump. While you can find pre-made versions of these online that you just like print off and stick into your journal, I do think there's a lot of benefit in making your own one, mainly because no online list is going to fit your life perfectly. There are going to be other life areas that aren't included that should be. There are going to be things on the list that aren't really relevant to your situation. We do have a separate video on the channel about how to make your own prompt list. That one featuring some free downloadables that you can use to help you out. I've got that one linked in the description box, and we'll also have it as the end card so you don't have to jump away right now. You may also notice that as I'm going and writing down my brain dump entries, my writing doesn't look how it usually does, and that's because I'm using my actual handwriting rather than the lettering that I typically do in my journal. Since I started bullet journaling, I have been using all caps anytime I do any entries, so like my daily task lists, my goals lists, like anything that I'm doing that's just like a bulk block of text, I've been doing in all caps. But when it comes to my regular handwriting, I do not do this. I don't write like my shopping list in all caps or anything like that. Because I have been in this kind of slump with my journal, I thought it might be a nice change of pace to do my regular handwriting in there. One of the reasons that I avoided this when I first started journaling is because my regular handwriting doesn't have the same level of consistency that writing in all caps does. Oftentimes, for my regular handwriting, I will write in italics, and the extent of the italicizedness of my lettering will change. Because I like things to look cohesive and I like things to look matchy-matchy, I kind of just fell into doing all caps because it was a very simple way to make everything look kind of the same. For May though, I'm trying something new. I'm getting rid of the monthly log, I'm using my regular handwriting, and I've even pre-set up my weekly spaces, which we had in a separate video on the channel earlier this week. I ended up adding just a touch more decoration to this layout, mainly to fill in any of the white space that I had in amongst the entries. I don't really like white space in my journal, and I also thought that with this theme, having white space eliminated made sense. I'll probably go and end up adding some more in as well. I've still got a decent chunk of space down here, so I can either add to this before the month starts or during the month, but having a look at what we've set up today, I know it's only a very small setup compared to usual. Typically I do more spreads than just 2, but I think that by stripping back to what is effectively essential for me and only including the things that I'm genuinely going to use, or at least I hope I'm going to use, I think I'm going to get more use out of my journal next month compared to how this month has been going. As promised, we have a video about the prompt list that I use for my brain dumping on screen here, which is a great resource if you want to get everything out of your head and onto paper so that you can sort through it and prioritize accordingly. If you want ideas for your own list and a free template to help you out, click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.